Joining me today is Jay Kranda. I have been knowing of Jay for a number of years. I really got into his work because he was writing during the time when digital evangelism and digital strategy and all of that stuff was prevalent. But what he wrote about and the way he wrote about it was very interesting to me. I could have relate to it. It's very analytical based. It go beyond just the hype of, hey, get on social media, hey, get a mobile app, but he looked behind the why. So I've always had an intellectual, respectable crush, but I'm so happy to finally sit down and actually officially have a conversation with you, Jay. Jay, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, kicking it off. I love talking about online ministry and helping people think about some of these areas, but thanks for engaging me in this conversation.
Well, Jay, I do recall there was a particular article you wrote and I commented below that article, and it inspired me to actually write my own. As I mentioned, the reason why it resonated with me because there was a lot of talking heads that talked about what was the best practice at that time. I was building solutions. I was also teaching churches. But the way you approach this from a very people-centric perspective, and being one of the few officially online pastors that are during that time, you had a different vantage point because your approach was people focused. And so when you wrote those blogs, and I think one of the things we discussed was, church online versus online church. I know you probably don't even like either word anymore, as is the title of your book of sorts, and you're gonna explain that a bit. But I really got intrigued with that. So thank you for that. But before we dive in, I would love, for those who may not know who you are and what you have done, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background?
Yeah, so I was one of the first online pastors to kind of be hired to do this because I'm on staff at one of the largest churches in I guess I can say in the world, Saddleback Church. And so we were one of the early churches to kind of experiment online. And I talk about this in my book, how we were on the internet in the 80s and 90s, and we started streaming in the early 2000s, in like 2003, 2004. And I came to the church my senior year of college, and I interned, and they had this thing called the Internet Campus, and I decided to invest some time in it. And essentially that led to a role that I got hired as the online pastor. And that was very much an experimental thing. And so I kind of got thrown into this digital space, not necessarily a digital expert in 2009, 2010, but just a person who wanted to be a pastor. And I started to merge these worlds of pastoring people in digital spaces. And obviously since 2008-9, the digital environments really evolved from, groups to social to video, streaming, Zoom, all these things. And you went from this very I would say early internet, PDF kind of catalog type of experience in forums to you can actually engage people in video and text, and it just became more robust. And our church started to merge these ministries. And so, I'm in Southern California. I've been doing that for over, almost coming up on 15 years near it. I've been the online pastor full time since 2013. And I wrote this book recently, Online Church is Not the Answer, because I wanted to help other ministries and people think about this, because I know I'm this anomaly of a person that's been able to dive deep into it. And I wanted to share my thoughts in a way that was helpful.
Yeah, I can definitely vouch for that. And because, again, just how your thought process translate hype and trends, because you kind of get behind the sort of meat of it. So I can definitely relate to that. And the other thing is at my church, I was actually talking about having a person that served as an online usher, not even let alone a pastor. And we were screaming about that for a number of years. It's only until recently, one of the current church board members, because at our institution, we don't have the pastors are the only one who paid. So, having an online pastor, it's a different structure. So one of the board members came and said, "Hey, Jason, do you know that thing you were talking about 9-10 years ago? they're now actually saying that we need, or they're talking about it. And, so I think, and most of
Yeah.
them are not paid, right? And there's not a whole lot, right?
Yeah, I mean it's very few that have I would kind of treat it like a youth ministry where sometimes you have a youth pastor that may have a couple hours here and there, and sometimes they have full time. It just kind of depends on the strategy. But I would be surprised if there's more than 30 full time pastors, online pastors around the country at least.
Yeah, one of the things we saw is that, well, initially I was at a church in Maryland. It was one of the more progressive churches in the area, in my denomination, and just in the area. So we were implementing things like social media, text messaging, mobile apps, along with very engaging, modern type preaching and teaching, and we saw a lot of results. So out of that came success. Like the church actually saw two baptisms totaling about 170 something baptisms, and that's a lot for American church and a lot for our denomination. So one of the things that came out of that is we saw, and that's how my company, the precursor to my company, I partnered with someone, and we saw that there's an opportunity because people were coming to us and saying, hey, could you teach me how to do this? Could you do this for us? And him being a business person, I've always been curious. We decided to partner, and that's how, some of the things that we did launch. But one of the things we saw while we did that for ourselves, or we did this for uh, for other people that hired us, was when we be running ads or doing these campaigns to get people to show up, time and time again, you're going to see people, will comment. They would be on Facebook on the devil's playground commenting that Facebook is the devil. You don't need this. Give me the old time religion, right? Could you speak to some of that and some of the things, some of your experience navigating that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I kind of jokingly talk about this idea that with a lot of people around, like anytime, one of the things that church history is really good at is we're good at preserving the faith. This is why 2,000 years later, we still have uh, churches and we still have this belief. So we're good at preserving truth, but we have, unfortunately, because of that strength, we have a hard history of anytime people introduce change, we tend to kill those people. It's kind of like it's part of the counter of the preserving and so forth. And sometimes we even forget, it could be hundreds of years and we forget things. It's like the Israelites coming back to the Holy Land and they have to find the scrolls again and they have to read it again, and they forgot while they were in exile what does it mean to follow these things. And so I say that like jokingly that anytime something new gets introduced, there's this a natural like gag reflex to say it's bad. And so that's what happened with digital, is that, oh, these spaces are wrong because of this or that. Now, people in these spaces have all sorts of opinions. Some people think technology is not morally neutral. They think it's actually might amplify. It might be immoral by nature. I don't believe that. I think these spaces and these tools are neutral, and it's like a fire where you could either burn your house down or make you a good cup of coffee, and it's all about how you wield it. And I think it's an amplification of a person. And so for me, I saw those I saw those responses or engage those people. Even to this day, I go, I understand why you might think it's a negative. And maybe there are spaces and things that are negatives, but I think the same way as Jesus, he got crucified because he went into people's homes. He dealt with the people that were so-called dirty, and he had meals with them. And I think these spaces and these tools are places we should consider having meals with and engage, and not just revolt. And I understand that gag reflex, but my job is to try to convince them, and I try to make this case that why you maybe don't gag, but actually like take a second look and see these are people that should know Jesus, and these are tools we can use to actually accomplish our kingdom goals.
Yeah, and to be honest, this didn't really represent everyone, and most of the naysayers are usually in the minority, but they're usually the loudest, right? So I think it doesn't paint everyone during that time. I think most people are oblivious. Most people just want what needs to happen to work, and again, it's just a minority. So But what's interesting actually is in reading your book, I you would think that, or maybe somebody on the outside looking in, even at that time, churches like Saddleback, churches like some of these churches that was more forward thinking and actually was more tech adapt, that you would think that things would have been all let's run, anything goes. So could you kind of talk to me about that in terms of your experience? Because in reading the book, I was surprised, or not that surprised, but it kind of reminded me that every organization, despite where they are, there are pushbacks, there are discussions, and there are challenges.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good reminder for everybody that sometimes people, it's always kind of the grass is greener type of thinking, that it's always going to be easier on your side versus my side. And yeah, there are things in my org, for example, that are easier for me to get done, but it's not a straight path. There are a lot of people, I would just say people I've engaged with, even leadership at my church, that may not share my vision. And we are in a weird transitional phase of church history where digital is just this new reality. And I think it's going to be naturally harder for people that are older to embrace all these change. I think it's going to be easier for people like me and my kids, because digital isn't this thing that is been added when they were in their 50s, 60s. It was built in. My kids used the internet by default. Where like my first iterations of the internet were like dial up, where you couldn't talk on the phone and be on the internet at the same time. And so for me, I'm just amazed that we can do video on the internet, because I remember when that wasn't possible. And so I think it's important to understand the age of an org and the size of the org all kind of influences what's possible and not possible. So we're a big org, so we can do more, but also because we're a 45-year-old church, there's going to be people that may not always understand why this is important, because they're going to be in their 60s and 70s. And so more possibility, but I've had a lot of pushback, and some of it very good, and some of it, like, it was hard for me to endure. Like, I was like, why don't you just get this vision? And I always like reminding people that if you have a vision about what's possible, no matter what it is, I mean, this with launching a company, is if it makes sense to you and it's hard to do, that means there's an opportunity for you to do something unique. And that's the point of you making it happen. And I always say, if it was easy, it would have already been done and you would not be needed in this moment. And so I think pushback is natural in anything new. I think the hardest part is trying to figure out, where do you need to receive some feedback and like listen to the criticism, and where do you need to like ignore and just push forward. And that can be hard, because there's times where I would say stuff or do stuff where it's like I'd be given feedback even within my own org, and there are times where I'm like, yeah, they were right, I did this wrong. And other times I'm like, I disagree. And finding out that line sometimes can be hard, because I mean, anybody who's young and dumb, like you think you're right. And I think sometimes you're wrong and you need to grow. And so I'm very grateful for example, I'm very grateful for my church, because they gave me space to figure out stuff. And I'm who I am because of my church. And this was only possible because I happened to be at my church at the right time, and nobody was doing more with this. And I wanted to do more. And then my leadership gave me space, but it definitely wasn't all like roses, like there was a lot of growing and figuring out how to make this happen. And that's part of the, they always say it's like, it's not the destination, it's the journey. And I am who I am because of that journey.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting. Even churches that are more pro a particular thing would also have pushback. And it's good, because you do have to take the wisdom of the elders, right? Because there is a viewpoint of, we can do everything that is new and seems effective and efficient, but you run a church and there are different people at different stages, and you might want to implement virtual reality, And everybody at the church may like the idea that, okay, if you say, hey, yes, it's going to bring more people in and stuff like that, but you might alienate a whole group of people who are not there yet. So I think the pushback is important. Even like when you look at the disciples, they fought amongst themselves and they didn't quite get it until some years later of learning and growing until Jesus sort of left.
Well, and I think that's why you have friends and people in your life. Obviously, as you're doing something, anything, if it's launching a business or launching a new digital effort at your church ministry, hopefully, you're spending time with God. You're asking God, you're seeking for his help. You also have a community of other believers that know your tendencies, that you're accountable to. I was just reading this morning in my own quiet time about how, you know, uh, Peter gets this vision about something that's like going to challenge the law up to that point, but he has this vision, but at the same time, two people come to his door and confirm the vision. And so the idea is there's accountability. It's not just him by himself. It's also God's using other people to confirm. So like if I have a vision that God's given me, but nobody confirms it around me, that might be a sign that maybe it's a little off and I need to fine tune it. But like, for example, I have friends, this is why like connections, like our friendship over the years, it confirms like, oh, I'm not crazy. I have friends at my church that I can talk to, peers. And so if somebody pushes back, like if a leader says, this is wrong, don't do this, I can go to my community, my tribe and go, hey, am I off on this? And they could either go, yeah, Jay, you are, or no, I think you're right, but change it here. And so this is why I think, again, this is on the foundation of what the Bible already teaches, that you need to be, two witnesses, you need to have a community, you need to be in a group. And so I've been very spoiled, I would say, because one of the things early on, and I talk about this in the book, that I had a group of other online pastors at other churches like mine, and we got to grow together through this the last 10 years. And this is not me doing this. This is me having a group of people, and we all kind of dragged each other forward.
Yeah, the other thing is it's important for others who are looking in to initiatives, big initiatives, that they understand that there are certain steps that are required in order to get buy-in. You don't just force your way through. Even if it's a good thing, you become a dictator, and it's anti-God. He gives us free will. We all want to participate. He do all allow us to participate in the kingdom work. So you have to get buy-in, and I think you actually begin to talk about a lot of that in the book. How do you actually go from the digital strategies and some of the things you talk about to actually getting buy-in in order to be effective, right?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, when I started, I didn't have anybody I could really talk to, and I think that was the struggle. Was I could tell my leadership didn't have a paradigm to teach me how to do online ministry in 2009, 2010, and there was only like one or two other churches that I knew of that were doing something, and I remember every time we would talk to those churches, you could just tell we just didn't know what this meant, and so what I wanted to do was early on, I started a blog and I started to just share stuff we were doing. And it wasn't anything big. It was just like, I did this, I did a chat, I used this. And people would ask me questions. And I started early on, I would get questions every month from churches. Oh, how do you stream? Or, oh, I saw you do online groups. Like, how do you do that using this tool, Talkbox? And then it'd be like something we would launch, like Facebook groups, or Zoom got created. And it's like people just had a lot of questions, and I started to answer them. And during COVID, I started to write a book because COVID obviously was this like full like adoption of online ministry from every church. And I started writing during COVID, and I kind of paused because like I found out COVID was changing the strategy so much that I actually wrote about 30,000 words, and I kind of scrapped it because I didn't think it was helpful. And then coming out of COVID, as our church started to change, and our church too was going through a lot of change. We were going from our founding pastor to a new pastor. And around that time, I was like, I learned a lot through what this could look like. And so I decided I want to write something that could actually be helpful. And around that time, I felt like I started to actually have something that I felt was like well-rounded as a book that I could give to churches that was helpful. And so I just went on that journey of writing something that I felt I could write to the average church that maybe they could go through with their volunteer team to help them actually embrace digital in a very practical way. And so that was kind of, and it took me about 3 years, and I wrote it part-time, just like whenever I could wake up early and stay up late. And I'm very glad it's done. And my prayer is that it's helpful to churches.
Yeah, so one of the things we want to kind of go into is the type of person. So we talking about online church or church online, and again, the book really lays out a nice framework. The first 5 chapters lays the foundation and the why, and the rest of it kind of goes into specifics. But one of the things that comes up, and you talk about, is the kinds of person, if you cannot afford an online pastor, if that's not your vision, typically what we see is usually a techie type person, right? A techie person who could set up the cameras and the streaming would then be in charge of everything related to online. And it depends. I think we have gotten better. But there is actually a kind of person that should be over the vision of understanding the online ministry part. And again, you did a very beautiful way to break out these different elevator levels, as you mentioned in the book. But could you just talk to us and share with us, like, what have you seen over the years with a techie type online leader versus somebody who understands the ministry aspect of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely hard that because we're in this generational change, we have people like younger generations are naturally more like technical. They're not developer technical by default, but they are more tech savvy. Like my kids know how to reset routers or problem solve if their Wi-Fi is not working. And older generations can struggle with that because they didn't grow up with this. And so it's not the water they swim in, by default, where my kids swim in this water by default. And I do think with some of these roles and some of this setup, it will get easier over the next couple of decades, but it can be hard in the in-between season. And definitely most of the early online pastors, people that were doing online ministry, were tech directors, like IT directors. Some of the early online church conference type of meetings were connected to IT conferences. And I remember I still have some friends that do this online, and they're technical, and I'm not an IT specialist. I'm not a front end developer or back end developer. Like I'm a pastor primarily. I'm technical, by nature, but I'm not. I can't stack a server rack. I can't, code in Python and all this stuff or use GitHub. You know what I mean? Like and so I think we're in a change where as that becomes more of a commodity too, more natural for people to use, it will be easier. But we're in this weird stage, and I like to encourage churches to think more pastorally with your digital strategy than technical, because I think that's actually more of the need. I think a lot of the technical stuff that churches and ministries need, you could get by just searching on YouTube how to set up something. So if I don't know how to use something, if I don't know the difference between, like our church is moving CRMs right now, and we were on a call with the ministry, and they asked some question around, do you want a virtual machine versus a server farm? Like I could go to Google and go, what's the difference between a virtual machine and a server farm? And I could go find that answer. Now that's a very technical question, but I would just say like YouTube and ChatGPT and Gemini and all these tools are pretty good. Like you can find out a lot of answers. So be more pastoral than technical in how you think about these roles.
Yeah, and okay, great. And so let's dive into the nuts and bolts here. Your book, Church Online is Not the Answer. Could you define or talk to the difference between church online versus online church, and what does that really mean? Could you kind of just clarify that?
Yeah, so church online is this phrase that kind of got created because of a platform called the Church Online platform, or many churches call it CHOP. It's a free platform that allows you to put in a video from YouTube or Vimeo or even streaming, and you can kind of create an experience with a video player and a chat. And it's a very robust free platform, amazing tool that got brought into kind of the public space, I think around 2012-ish or something. And a lot of churches, like tens of thousands of churches, use this tool. So when people thought about online church, they would think about church online. And really what that phrase, now this isn't what the ministry meant when they created this tool. It literally just meant create a worship experience online, like just a broadcast, like a TV ministry online that was social, that had chat and so forth. And so a lot of people, when they think about church online, they think about, oh, streaming our services and having a chat. And my intention with my book is embracing digital for your church is not just having a YouTube stream or a Facebook stream. Embracing digital for your church is embracing the paradigm that digital can aid you in all objectives of your church and doing much more with it. And so, for example, our church has an online community and we stream our services, yes, but we also have ways for people to serve online. We have hundreds of people in online groups. We have people that tithe, that people that evangelize, and we have people that host pop-up church experiences called extensions. And it's not just streaming something on Sunday. And a lot of churches think that's what church online is. And my attention with that book, and really my subtitle, so when I say online church is not the answer, I'm trying to say beyond just streaming to digital discipleship. And I want you to get beyond just pushing content out. It's not just about uploading content to TikTok or Instagram. It's about digital discipleship. And the answer is, what does that mean for your church's vision, mission, ministry methodology? And your church is going to be, we'll be aligned, but it's going to look a little different. And so look at how you disciple people. And the question is, can digital aid in that discipleship strategy? And I think the answer is yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's something you mentioned in the book without giving it away. You were having these different levels, the front door type approach to digital or online church, the Amish approach, the Alpha Omega approach. Could you give us a little hints behind what that is?
Yeah, so I have kind of these approaches that I unpack in one of the chapters in my book of there are different ways to think about digital. The first level is this Amish approach where like Amish people tend to be, they're not fully anti-technology because they do embrace some forms of technology. They just think technology distracts you with your relationship with God. So they try to limit the amount of technology. And some churches are Amish in their thinking with digital and technology. I don't think churches should be this way, but I think some churches are, and they have their own convictions for various reasons. Then you have like a broadcast strategy where people just push out content, where they embrace digital, but it's literally just for like promotional reasons. It's like, watch this, come on Sunday. So they'll be on Facebook, Instagram, whatever, but it's about like seeing it and showing up in person. And the chasm between those are very vast. Then you have kind of a front door approach where they are kind of the 2.0 of the broadcast strategy. They know they should be embracing digital. And so they're starting to invest. They might be on church online. They might be posting some engaging questions, but it's very shallow, I would say. It's all the meaningful stuff happens in the room. And so they're starting to think about it. It's kind of like a teenager who's kind of figuring out, but they're not fully like an adult yet. And then the last approach is kind of more of on a spectrum. It's Alpha Omega. And the idea is that you have thought about digital in such a way from beginning to end of how you disciple people. And there's going to be variants of degrees of kind of embracing the Alpha Omega approach in your church. And so your Alpha Omega adoption of digital and technology might be different than ours. And 100% engagement in digital in an Alpha Omega strategy is going to be different. And so your engagement based off of your strategy and your conviction is going to be different than ours. And so there's going to be churches that have 100% engagement, might be small amount of digital in a certain area. And what I do in my book is I have this kind of diagram or this visual where I encourage to take 5 key areas of your church. So let's say weekend services, small groups, let's say a discipleship program, kids ministry, student ministry. And I encourage them to go, what does 100% healthy digital engagement mean in each of these areas? And so maybe on the weekend, it's all the way up here. And maybe for kids, it's here. And so like, again, 100% adoption of digital ministry, let's say for your kids ministry, doesn't mean you have to upload something to YouTube. It might mean a texting strategy. And so I try to lay it out where like, I want you obviously not to be Amish or broadcast or front door local, but my challenge is digital aids you in your objectives. And I think digital can be twined into every key area of your church, but that adoption might be different. But I want you to think beyond just streaming, but let it seep into all areas of your church. And really, the book unpacks that in such a way that you could read it with volunteers at your church, and you guys are working together to figure out, what does this mean for my church?
Yeah, and yeah, I fully agree. As I said, the first 5, 6 chapters really walk through the theory behind it, and I think it's very important to understand the why and the what, because then whatever new technology comes, you can adapt without just kind of understanding the how to do it, right? Because I think that's important. So I really appreciate that approach, and I highly recommend everyone kind of just check it out, because the last few chapters is literally something you can work, as you said, with your volunteer team and go step by step through different paths, understand where you are, and then go step by step through different paths. Yeah, so let's actually look at another question on what's the biggest misconception with online ministry that you aim to like debunk in your book, or clarify or expand on, what people should be aware of.
Yeah, that's a big question. I think one of the bigger ones is that to fully embrace online or any technology doesn't mean you forsake the in-person. I think it's a companion tool. And so I try to really, there's a reference that I make to another book that was kind of popularized, that digital will either, in the marketplace, will either, it will either kind of fully replace or just enhance. And so like they kind of use this example of digital fully displaced taxi drivers with Uber. It fully replaced it. But let's say digital didn't fully replace the hotel experience. It just enhanced it. So, I kind of talk about Uber versus Marriott. And so like Uber was a new thing. The way you transport potentially in the future is completely changed. Digital completely changed it. I just go to this app and I book and there's even places where you don't need cars because you could just do via Uber. But Marriott as a hotel chain did not go out of business because of digital. Their experience just got better. So fully transform or enhance. And I think one of the big ones in the book is I try to communicate to the church. I do not think digital and technology is fully transforming the church. I think it is enhancing the experience. And so lean into it in a way not to be scared, but like, how do you leverage this in a smart way? And I think actually I make this point in the book that I think the hotel experience, specifically industries that have a physical experience, you can learn a lot from how they embrace digital. So I think as you look at how Marriott embraces digital, but they still have a goal for people to show up and book a hotel. And I think churches can look at industries like that and learn a lot, because it's not cannibalizing their market, it's enhancing their experience. Another one would be, and again, I'm using big companies here because they're big, and so we all are familiar with it. But Disney is this way. Disney has digital products like Disney Plus and digital experiences on social platforms, but they still want you to book a cruise. They want you to go to one of their parks. And I say that like their industry or their company didn't get transformed, but enhanced their core product. And if you even look at their revenue stream, most of the revenue comes from the parks and the cruises. And so I say that like, hey, church leader, your experience isn't going away. You're still going to gather. You're still going to do all that stuff, but I think you can enhance. So that's one of the bigger things I try to like address in the book.
Yeah, let's talk about the future. Do you see a hybrid approach in terms of online ministry and church, or fully online in the future? We're talking about virtual reality. We're talking about augmentation. We're talking about, where do you see things headed?
I think the short answer, it's a hybrid. I think there will be fringes of people doing, and I talk about this in the book, there'll be VR things or gaming things. I have a friend, Mark, who does Lux Church, and they do a bunch of cool stuff, and they're very digital only focused. But I think those are fringe experiences reaching very unique audiences. And I think those audiences might go from 1% to 8% over the next couple of decades. But I don't think the in-person experience is going to be the majority experience in the future. I don't think, these VR type of experiences are going to be normative in the way that that people think about the future and they get scared. So like I think in the future, for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years from now, we will still be getting married, doing life face to face near each other. Now, does that mean there might be some digital component, hologram, VR, holodeck? I don't know. Yes, that might be a new thing. Maybe every home in the future has a holodeck and we do meetings in this VR type of experience. Yeah, but I think like my wife Jody, I think no matter what future world I get dropped into in the next 100,000 or even hundreds of thousands of years, I think we will always have a physical expression of that will be our primary existence. And again, I think we can look at scripture. When we look at the eternal future, Jesus has physical holes in his wrists in that vision that John gets. Like, I think we are both spiritual and physical. And so I don't think the future is just spiritual. We know this, right? Like there is like heaven, or, the second heaven, however you want to classify it, is a physical realm that has spiritual components. So I say that not to go like, I know what the future will be, but I think the physical will always be more relevant than people realize. And so people think they see these trons or books about VR and snow crash and all these crazy things. They go, oh, the future is going to be this. I go, no, I think it will be a hybrid, because I think even our existence is a hybrid. And so but that's speculation on my part, but that's how I feel.
So, hey, we have talked a lot about a lot of things, again, focusing on a lot of the why and the what's, because to get into the house on a call like this, it's very case specific. And I know one of the things you have is a cohort coming up, which we would talk about, which I think gets into the nuts and bolts, so people can reach out to you or other professionals to design a system. At this point, if somebody's overwhelmed by all that they're hearing, it's like, oh, this sounds good, I've heard this before, where do I start right now? This sort of idea of take a breath, do this next. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there are a lot of things to kind of get started to kind of hack your way to kind of figure stuff out. I actually think the most basic thing is to cast vision and bring people along with your vision of how you think about digital. Because I think one of the more powerful things is you can do a lot yourself to hustle and make something a reality. But I actually think what you need to do is that the idea needs to spread throughout your org. And the only way you do that is by bringing people along with how you're thinking. So one of the encouragements is that whatever you learn from my book, or you're learning from this resource, this podcast, this video, however this gets decentralized, is send this link, watch it together and talk about it, because the idea is the more powerful thing. And so, because that's actually what gets spread. And so like, it's, one of the most powerful things about America is the America dream. It's not actually the reality of that dream. It's the promise of the dream. And I don't say that to be, this grandiose kind of vision, but I would say people in your org at your church have to believe they can use digital, and they just don't have a framework of what's possible. And part of this book I wrote, part of resources like this that you're creating, is that there's supposed to be something to be consumed with other people in your org, and bring people along with your thinking. And as they kind of come along with it, people will start solving problems that you don't even realize are problems, and they will start coming up with ideas you didn't even think were possible. And again, I think bringing people along, I would just get a group of 3 to 4 together and maybe go through my book or watch this interview together with them and just start talking about stuff.
Yeah, good point. And again, it reminds us, as we mentioned before, about the Jesus ministry was the example of that, right? It took them 3.5 years and they still didn't really get it. But Jesus was casting a vision and actually getting that buy-in, so that that free will buy-in, so that when they accepted it, the ministry took off. Like, we saw a number of baptisms only happen after a large number of baptisms happened after Jesus left, after the disciples became under one accord. And it's like the idea that most people think that, hey, what if we had a trillionaire or a billionaire or a multi-millionaire? If this person was at your church, and many churches have that, the idea that you could just depend on this one person to fulfill the vision of whatever the leaders say, and then that will be a Christian movement, has never worked and isn't. Right. In fact, that can lead to a lot of challenges. And what God actually wants is all of us to participate in that kingdom work. And hence, if you're a leader, getting buy-in, appropriate is actually maybe more effective in the long run than forcing an idea. Right. So I do appreciate that. Final two questions. So yeah, let's talk about the cohort. I think it's happening really, really soon. So tell me, is the cohort connected to the book, and why it is you're doing this time, and how could people kind of benefit from it?
Yeah, I've done this a couple of times where I've taken a small group of churches together, and we kind of grow together. We set some digital goals, and we kind of I love learning in community with other people. I like asking people like you, what's working, what's not. And so this cohort is just kind of something that I did during COVID, and it was really helpful. And so we're launching this in March. And so we have like 1 or 2 spots left. So if somebody's watching this and want to be part of it, you can go to my website. But again, I practice what I preach. I like learning in community. And so I don't, I might be a lowercase expert, in some of this stuff, but I actually learn a lot from other people. So part of it is just like, hey, we all want to do digital. Let's figure out how to do it together. And so I'm getting a small group of churches and ministries together where we can kind of grow over 6 months together.
Yeah, and it's almost like if you don't want to read the book, you can actually kind of work with the author of the book who have done this and have had results, right? So I think it's a perfect opportunity. If you don't have time to do the cohort, I think if you read the book with your team, and as Jay said, you kind of marinate on the ideas and let the Holy Spirit lead, it will lead you through the next steps. And if you read the entire book, they are very, very practical steps that you can take to first assess where you are and then to figure out where you need to go. So definitely I would recommend either one, read the book or join the cohort if you have the bandwidth. And one of the final questions is, is there anything you learned from writing the book that was surprising to you?
Yeah, I mean, I've been super grateful by the response of friends and people who are sharing the book. And, I kind of didn't know if it would be received well, because it's kind of this very niche type of thing, especially coming out of COVID. Like, are people even interested in this topic anymore? So I've been super grateful for it. And no, I mean, I think the next decade, there's going to be a lot of change around these digital things. And so actually, one of the funnier things, I have a chapter around the future. One of my last chapters is about what's going to happen in the future. And I get a lot of messages about that chapter, which kind of shocked me. I mean, it shouldn't, but it's just kind of a throwaway thing about what's going to happen in the future. And it's always fun to speculate, but I hope, my big hope with the book was, and I think most people receive, is here's a paradigm how to think about digital as a pastor and as a ministry. And you can be confident of what's going to stick and what's going to change. And let's ride this wave of digital and kind of the future wisely. And I hope it's helpful to ministries.
Well, Jay, thank you for your time. Thank you for your ministry. Thank you for your friendship over the years. And I would just pray that God continues to bless what you're doing, bless your family, and bless the work that you're doing for other churches as well as people at your church. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.